The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Financial Rebellion. Hello, Carolyn. It's a beautiful summer day here. How is it in Ohio?
It's nice, but pretty muggy and hot.
That's what we're getting from all over Europe. Hot, 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 hot reports. So we have the wonderful Margaret Byfield joining us today. But first, we're going to dive into the news. We've got a fair number of news stories. So Lou, let's bring up. This one is not our. This is a very sad situation. You want to describe this, Carolyn?
Yeah, two twins were, and the mothers, they were initially against vaccinating these kids, and I guess we're talked into it. But they're twins. They were 18 months old, I think, and they died. And they're plaintiffs in one of the CHD cases, and they were interviewed on CHD, and the mother's been targeted and charged with murder. It was absolutely not murder.
So some of the worst stories you hear are as a result of SIDS' sudden infant death, and I think the numbers are 72% happen within a week of vaccination. So 58% of all infant deaths reported to VAERS occurred within 3 days post-vaccination. 78.3% occurred within 7 days post-vaccination. So there appears to be a very significant relationship between SIDS and vaccination, but of course, the way, if you're the vaccine industry, you protect that is to blame the parents, and that's what we're seeing. And it's some of the ugliest cases, because you're talking about targeting somebody who's lost their kids, and now they're being blamed for it in something that's could be a criminal conviction.
Right. She's being indicted now.
Right. So I don't know if there's a GoFundMe, but I hope if there is, Lou, let's make sure we get it on next time around. But on a lighter note, we have another story for you that it warms my heart. So Klaus Schwab has filed a complaint with the police after a listening device was found in his home. Last year, Schwab said, quote, "We have all got to submit to surveillance. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." Here we go again.
You can't make it up. You couldn't make it
up. Exactly. Okay, next story, Lou. Wonderful piece from Meryl. So we're always yapping at you. You got to use cash. And Meryl did a deep dive on what the fees are and the costs of using credit cards. And it's chilling, even for someone like me who knows this and knows it again and again. When she walks through the fees and what we're paying for the privilege of not using cash, it's expensive. So take a look at that and you will get inspired. Another one, Lou? Okay, I want to tip everybody off to this. This is very important. We, as you know, at Solari, Carolyn and I and the Solari team are working to put up guardrails to stop programmable money. But this summer, what we've seen is the Depository Trust Corporation that archives 114 trillion of stocks and bonds is starting forward with a pilot to essentially tokenize stocks and bonds and allow stocks and bonds to be traded essentially through the crypto wallets on people's mobile phones. And as a result, because of stable coins and now trading stocks and presumably bonds with digital tokens, we're now talking about being able to reach billions of people around the planet and get them attracted into all sorts of activities, whether it's online gambling, whether it's prediction markets, but now it's stocks and bonds. And the CEO of Coinbase said the other day that they will be able to reach, as this goes forward, 4 billion people who are not yet in the U.S. stock market. And it's interesting, there's a big debate, as Carolyn knows, between the value investors saying we're in a bubble. The stock market is at an almost all-time high PE and Schiller PE. And so we're almost at an all-time high. And the value investors are saying it has to reverse to mean in the history of the market, there have been 26 bubbles, and they've always reverted to the mean. And so the question is, will this bubble return to the mean? And yet, if you watch what's happening with digital tokens, the tools that are being built to blow a bigger bubble than we've ever seen are quite significant. And if you are able to take, DTC has 114 trillion of stocks and bonds, but globally there's over 250 trillion. If you're able to get those unprogrammable money and get 4 billion people coming into them through the crypto accounts, I don't know, Carolyn, do you think they can blow a big bubble?
Of course they can.
Right. And they're saying they're going to trade these 24/7.
We're already in a bubble. We certainly are in a bubble with the tech stock. The tech stocks are what's holding up the market. That's where almost all the profits are at this point.
Right. Well, we just saw SpaceX go public with it. It doesn't have a PE because it doesn't have earnings. It's losing money, and so if you look at the comparable stocks, because SpaceX is essentially a defense contractor, if you look at the comparable defense, they're trading at tiny amounts compared to SpaceX, which essentially has an infinite PE. So, yeah, we're in a bubble. But if you look at what the Coinbase CEO just said, we're building a lot of tools to build a bigger bubble. One of the things we've heard is that, again, the digital token stocks will be traded 24/7. And some people are talking about offering as much as 20 times margin.
Well, and the relevance to this to everyday people is 401. So much of the 401k holdings are in index funds. So if 50% or 25% of the market is in these stocks, that's what you own if you're in an index fund.
Well, it's 45%. So it's interesting. Ed Dowd just did a great interview, and he said, why is everybody investing in the digital control grid that's going to be used to he said, you're financing your prison.
But you're automatically doing that if you're in an index fund that doesn't exclude them.
Right. And you don't have to. There are ways not to do that. So let's just show. Somebody sent me this video this morning, and I wanted you to see it because I keep saying to people, why are you financing the thing you say you don't want? Why are you financing data centers? If you're trying to stop data centers, why are you financing them? Why are you building the digital control? Why are you financing? We just saw the Presbyterian Church divest themselves of Palantir stock because they said they didn't want to finance, what Palantir was doing. Anyway, but let's take a look at this video because one of the things this video shows, people have been very disassociated from where I'm putting my money versus what the kind of world I want my children and grandchildren to live in. And this video takes a very attractive young man and starts to bridge to bring that disassociation down and start to connect the dots between what you're financing and what you're doing. So this is at I think a conference called AI for the Good, and we have a speaker from Amazon speaking, and a young man jumps up on stage, and this is what he said. Let's watch this.
Drop Project Nimbus! Drop Project Nimbus!
Stop! You are making Project Nimbus a project of billions of dollars that Amazon is investing so that Israel has free access to your servers. You are investing billions in that. Your technology, Project Nimbus, develops Lavender, develops the software Where's Daddy that actively tracks using AI people in Palestine, and when they come back, they kill them together with their families. And you know this. You know this, Bernard Focus, and you're making millions out of this. You're sitting here as if you're trying to do good, as if you're trying to be for the good of AI. What do you have to say for yourself? How do you sleep at night? Maybe that's why you're looking so panicked. Maybe that's why you cannot even stand on this stage anymore and look at these people, because you know exactly what your technology is being used for. They know exactly where their profits are coming from, and they continue anyways. You should be stopping them. You should be stopping those criminals right here. Why you facilitate genocide? Why you're continuing to be complicit in the deaths of innocent people? 3 years on.
Drop Project Nimbus! Drop Project Nimbus!
Okay, we can cut it.
Amazon employees say something.
So we're seeing all sorts of situations where people are connecting the dots. But to me, and this is what we keep saying, Carolyn, here it is, coming clean. If you don't want to see this stuff in the world, stop financing it yourself. That's how you do it. You just stop doing it. Okay, next story. Dennis Kucinick, the wonderful, fabulous retired Congressman Dennis Kucinick from your state of Ohio, Carolyn, did a fabulous interview with Tucker. I can't recommend it enough. So let's just play a little clip.
Procurement office.
That's right. And the procurement, I mean, it's very significant. So that's why I'm saying there's a limited amount of oversight that occurs then. You have to remember, when I first got to Congress, the Inspector General of the Department of Defense said that there was over $1 trillion in accounts that could not be reconciled. That was in 1997. They couldn't keep track of over $1 trillion. Today, it's multiple trillions. They had like 1,100 different accounting systems in the Pentagon. It's engineered to where money might just disappear.
It's engineered to evade oversight. There's no way to
right now
even know what's happening.
Now it is. So this time, if we bring Israel into the picture and create this merger at the top of the most sensitive aspects of our national security, our national defense, where's that going to go? So,
Right. So I don't know if you remember this, Carolyn, but when the money started to go missing from the Pentagon, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, Dennis Kucinich was the only voice in Congress who kept bringing it up and kept bringing it up. And, so he's been on the missing money. What he's talking about is in the National Defense Authorization that's being considered, there's a proposal to, in essence, integrate the Israeli military into the U.S. military and, according to the Senate version, into U.S. intelligence and the State Department and the Commerce Department. And what Dennis is pointing out is if trillions are missing on an unaccountable basis and the U.S. government is not complying with the financial management laws, that means they will sit then as a partner on top of that flow of completely, basically trillions of dollars that's disappearing and is driving our debt up for which we're accountable. So this is a major hijacking of even the illegal cash flows. It's very scary. But I wanted to bring up, we will be dealing with this in our legislative briefing today. It starts at 2 p.m. ET. You can read all about it at the Solari, but we're going to be talking about scenario planning that we shared on Financial Rebellion to understand programmable money in the automated third lock and what we can do to stop the digital control grid. We're going to go through our 3 model legislation, and we're going to do a poll. So this is going to be very lively. We're going to be doing polls and polling the audience about what they think as to what's going to happen, what the risks are, and then what we can do about it. But Dennis is joining us for the discussion. So we'll lead off the discussion with Dennis and what he thinks about all this. And, as somebody who knows a great deal about the nuts and bolts of how you change things and how you stop things, I'm really forward to looking forward to having him on the legislative briefing.
Right. And our Financial Rebellion viewers who've watched several episodes going back, and if you haven't yet, go watch them. We talked about this scenario planning, so this will be very familiar to you if you watch the legislative briefing.
Right. And your feedback was very useful. A lot of viewers sent some excellent feedback. Okay, so now let's turn to our show because we have one of our favorite guests back today, Margaret Byfield from American Stewards of Liberty. I just had the pleasure of joining her in her conference earlier this year down in Texas. And Margaret is, if you want to support the leaders that are really making an enormous difference, Margaret is absolutely one of them. And American Stewards of Liberty is an organization we should all be supporting. So Larry supports it. We can't encourage or recommend it enough. And when I was down in Texas, we want to touch base on many of the different issues that Margaret covers for us, from the energy grid to the 30 by 30 to conservation easements. When I was down at the conference, she made a wonderful presentation with one of the pastors in her network on Stewarding Creation. And it's a vision of how we care for the land, the earth, things that are very near and dear to Margaret and her husband's and groups' sort of concerns. And so I wanted to bring it here because if you look at what we're doing to the environment, especially now with data centers, I mean, we are doing horrible things to the environment. And it's very important that we embrace a philosophy of being good stewards for the land and the resources that we've been given. So I wanted Margaret to come back and brief us on this. So Margaret, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Financial Rebellion.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and that was a great introduction. And it was a great conference, and I'm so thankful you were there to join and contribute and be one of our keynotes, which was you provided some great information to our audience. So appreciate that.
What a wonderful group of people. I mean, that's, first of all, you had a whole bunch of ranchers, but then you had a whole bunch of people who get a lot done. So it was wonderful. So tell us about Stewarding Creation, but start by telling us how it happened, how you came to develop and publish this.
Well, so our pastors had asked us if we would create a life course for the church that would help the church body understand what environmentalism was, what conservation is, and really how these worldviews fit into God's biblical plan. And so it really, one of the things that they identified is there is so much creation worship that is just prevalent in our social structure now, that people are really being led astray by that. And they don't understand the difference between a very fundamental principle, biblical principle, which is that we are to worship the creator, not the creation. But the worldview has moved even strong Christians into believing that we need to live sustainably. We should only use renewable resources. We should be protecting lands and species. And it has moved so far away from what God actually commands us to do. That's what our pastors asked, if we could help develop a course that would help lead people to understand what is God's design, and then be able to evaluate their own life and things that they support and practice to see if it aligns with God's plan. And so that's how we developed the Stewarding Creation booklet, which anybody can download free off of our website. And when we started it, I told the pastors, I said, well, you first need to recognize I have a bias. I've been fighting the environmental movement my entire life, so I have this automatic bias. And so they vetted everything because I wanted to make sure that it was biblically sound. And so we ended up writing this booklet so that gave them the ability to really kind of go through these ideas and make sure they were biblically sound. And so the result is this Stewarding Creation book. But it is an incredible Bible study to take on, because we don't really think about it in those terms. Nobody really looks at what does God say about how we should be caring for our land and for earth, his creation. And when you start looking for his specific commands, you find the Bible is overwhelmingly speaks to this topic, but we kind of miss it. And let me just start, if you want, I'll just start with the very, very fundamentals that everybody is going to recognize. But God sets forth in the Bible, in the first 2 chapters of the Bible, how we are to steward the land, steward creation. He gives us 7 principles, 7 commands. He hasn't added to those, and he hasn't taken any of those away throughout the entire biblical history, throughout the entire Bible. And those 7 are very simple. Be fruitful, multiply, inhabit the earth, subdue the earth, rule the species and all the creatures, watch over it, and work it. Work the land and watch over it. Those are the 7 principles. Now, and we're all familiar with those, the first 2 chapters of Genesis, so we're familiar with that. What he doesn't say is multiply until you reach X billion people, right? He doesn't say there's no population control mandate in his design. He doesn't say inhabit the earth, but set 30% aside and don't touch it, right? He didn't say that. And when you really start studying how did he command us to steward this earth, and what even was the civil system that he set up for us, which we know comes from how he established the Israelite tribes and how they broke the land up into the tribes and into basically a small land ownership system. So we know how he has set that forth. And so when you look at that, you realize that God has designed our earth so that it doesn't matter how many people we have. He has already made way for that. He has already provided for that. And so it's not, our responsibility is not to try to save the earth or preserve the earth. It's actually to do the opposite. When we work the land and we take care of the land, it flourishes and it produces more. And ultimately, I think, just kind of put the big bow on this whole philosophy or the whole viewpoint, is that we are commanded to trust God and in all things. And sometimes we look at things and we read things in the Bible and we think, well, we don't really get how the Genesis story of how Earth was created in 7 days. That doesn't really line up with our worldview, what scientists tell us about this. In all those situations, what we need to do is trust God. The Bible is full of prophecies that we didn't understand, or the people of that time didn't understand when they were said, which have come to be true. The Bible's full of over about 2,300 prophecies. 2/3 of those have come true. There's no man on earth that could ever predict the future as it has been rolled out and revealed to us through the Bible. So trust God. When he says, this is how I've done it, trust him. And when he says, I am in command of all the earth, all the climate, I decide when it rains, I decide when it becomes a wasteland, not man. Man has no control over saving the earth. All man can do is be obedient to God and how we are to steward the earth.
Right. But here is our challenge. We are not doing a good job of stewarding the earth right now, in my opinion. So if you look at the deterioration in our soil, and if you look at the latest pesticides bill that just got passed, if you look at the effort to drive small farmers off the land or to insist on Terminator seeds and on, we have a group of people centralizing power, and to a great extent, they've been using environmentalism to help them do it. And I think one of the things we've seen is an effort, for example, they tried it in Chile to ensure that animals have the same rights as humans. And basically by moving up, the worship of creation, or the creating seniority over humans to the animals, they're using that to basically consolidate ownership and control of wealth. In other words, it's a ploy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have absolutely nailed it. And it's because of that, that's why we have areas that are not doing as well. I mean, when areas are managed, when our natural resources are managed from a monopoly viewpoint, so corporates, and that's what you have to understand about the environmental movement. It's a monopoly. It's a monopoly control over our natural resources, whether it be through the land trusts who own millions and millions of conservation easements, or through large corporations, Smithfield, which owns, the hog, our hog production, to, all of these different entities that are really destroying the land and destroying the environment. These are monopolies. They have been able to acquire enough of the natural resources that they can dictate us how we're going to live our lives, which is 100% opposite of what God designed.
Right.
So if we walk back to how did he settle Israel when Israel came into the promised land? He divided it up between the 12 tribes. And then each tribe divided that up amongst their lineage, their sons and daughters. And then a whole system was set up so that that land then would be transferred inside that inherited family. And
well, it was a vision of the land's relationship to family wealth.
Exactly.
And back to care for creation.
Absolutely. When you have a small landowner on that land, two things are going to happen. Number one, they have what they can handle. So they don't have so much that they can't take good care of it, but they have enough so that they know everything about that inch of land. They raise their family there. There's generations that understand every piece of that particular land. Those are God's stewards over that parcel. They have what they can handle. And how well they steward that it reflects in how well they do financially, whether they prosper, whether they can feed their families. So they have to take good care of that land with the long vision that it needs to take care of future generations in order to sustain and to provide what they need today and to be prosperous. The second thing it does, that system, if you remember the year of Jubilee, any land that had been transferred outside of the family, the proper inherited landowner had the right to buy that back, and it had to be sold back to him. So what God created was a system where it was always going to be managed by small landowners, and it would be very difficult for any one entity to gain a monopoly over our resources. So where we have these environmental issues that are problematic and are causing us problems today in our food system, which we are absolutely seeing, it comes down to control by oligarchs or governments or conservation groups that have control of all of these resources, and it's not being properly stewarded with that small landowner the way that God designed.
So what I watch, and Carolyn and I have been watching it for many years, are multiple vectors whereby people are, or sort of consolidation of real estate and land is happening, all under the justification of the virtue veils. You know, the vector to plunder is always presented as some form of virtue. And we are seeing this. And one of the things I wanted to bring up to help the audience understand how fundamental the psychopathy is of where the current system is going is, I think it was called the Sustains Act. Is that it, Margaret?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
Let me just bring up my understanding of the Sustains Act, and hopefully Margaret will correct me because I'm probably going to oversimplify. But what they were trying to do was set up what's called natural processes, like bee pollination is a natural process, or photosynthesis is a natural process. And on your land that you think you own are all these natural processes happening. And what they wanted to do is basically set large government contractors up to regulate the natural processes on your land. And if you look at the regulation and compliance of that and the cost of that, you're basically talking about potentially destroying somebody's property rights.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been one of the most egregious backdoor laws that was passed. And actually, it was a bill that the Republican chair of agriculture, it was his bill, and he got it put in an appropriations bill, which then there were some language changes in it. But an appropriations bill under Pelosi's stewardship, and it was passed into law. So what it is doing is it is requiring that all these conservation programs like USDA that they manage. So conservation stewardship program and different things like that, where landowners can go and the government will pay them a grant or some kind of a fee to help them do X, Y, and Z on their land, essentially for conservation purposes. And so what the Sustains Act did was it created a mechanism where a private company could now contribute to those conservation funds that then are applied on a private landowner's property. And what the law specifically says is that once they do that, that private company can then tell or prescribe to the secretary how much of the ecosystem services they now own on that private property. And those ecosystem services are those intrinsic values that you talked about that are not property rights: pollination, photosynthesis, all those things. They can say now, because we invested in this conservation program on this piece of private property, our return is that we now own the ecosystem services on that property. Now, the law does not have any parameters that protect landowners. They don't require consent. They don't require notice to the landowner prior. So the landowner could say, hey, I don't want this program because I don't want that. I don't want to give up that right. And they don't have the ability to even say, you don't own that much. I own X percentage. I mean, the landowner's completely pushed out of that. And the other thing we don't know, there's no parameter that says it's not retroactive. Meaning, if they started putting money in years ago, can they retroactively go back and say, we've owned this all these years? And where this gets very dangerous gets back to our fight that you were so instrumental in helping us stop. It was the taking down the natural asset companies on the New York Stock Exchange, because that was setting up the investment device that would allow these ecosystem services to be enrolled as an asset for investors to invest in on the New York Stock Exchange. So fast forward with the Sustains Act now, a company that has invested private dollars into a conservation program on a private piece of land would be able to enroll those ecosystem services into NACs if we hadn't stopped them, and invest in them and get another return off of them. Or conservation easements were the other way that they were doing this.
But stick them into our retirement savings. I mean, This is what we saw. We just saw the Russell 1000 and NASDAQ change their requirements. So a company that just went public, has no profits, and hasn't proved that it's got an enduring liquid market and doesn't have at least 10% liquid, as is supposed to be the rule. All those rules got waived so you could stuff SpaceX into everybody's retirement funds, which means all those indexed that are in your retirement fund had to suddenly buy it, even though it didn't pass any of the standards. So, imagine sticking a NAC into everybody's index funds. And you're just, when Larry Fink says, we're going to use everybody's retirement savings to finance the data centers, this is how they're getting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Margaret, if I'm not mistaken, there was a tax act, perhaps under Biden, maybe it was more recent, that changed the requirements for or the goals of federal conservation easements, so that there was this sustainable development layer, and the things that people signed up for in their conservation easements have been interpreted in a way that it works more differently from what they signed up for, at least that the program represented, which was you can continue to do agricultural things on your land the same way as you always did. And they've got this additional layer with goals having to do with cutting down carbon and things like that. Are you familiar with that?
And you might be thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act in the Biden administration. And what they did was these same conservation programs we're talking about, they actually changed the language and the purpose of the law, the purpose for the funding, without telling the landowners.
And is that retroactive, or is it only for future easements?
Well, and it wasn't just conservation easements. It's actually just these conservation programs like conservation stewardship, and EQIP is another one. That only applied to the money that they spent under the Inflation Reduction Act. So if you took an EQIP contract on your property from IRA funds, the Inflation Reduction Act funds, then the new parameters of that law would apply to your property. And that's where the way they rewrote that was so that you were agreeing to things that would reduce methane gas from livestock and would help it helped stop the climate crisis. So you were basically enrolling in the green scam and committing yourself that you were going to be working towards that. So it was a way to reduce agriculture production and get control of all that. So it applied to those funds so now that those funds aren't being spent, and those have actually been, what they did was they took the remaining funds and they rolled them into the original conservation programs under the original language, which is still problematic. And this gets back to this whole scenario, I think is really important for your audience to understand. We identified when we first started fighting through 30 by 30, there was a game plan that the environmentalists published that had the whole climate crisis strategy. And it was a good 400, 500 page document. So we went through that. And one of the things they identified is we need to change these conservation programs out of USDA, change the language, which they did through the IRA, and then so that we get control over the resources and we can start telling people what to do on their property. The key theme that we saw through everything in their game plan was they were using these conservation programs, which landowners look at as being helpful and not problematic and doesn't put any strings on their property. They were using those to do exactly that and ultimately push them into conservation easements, which gives them even more control over their land. But this is one of the reasons why we were hyper-focused on these conservation programs early on in the 30 by 30 fight. And I still maintain today the best way you can protect your property from any federal overreach, if you can do it at all, is stay out of these conservation programs. And I know there's a big push right now. A lot of money is going into the regenerative programs, agriculture programs. I'm very leery of those. I know they're well intended, but what is problematic to me is those conservation programs have tentacles that we don't even understand, including that go to the Sustains Act. Right. And that is law. I mean, that is the first time that I know of Congress has authorized the monetization of these natural processes, which we fought tooth and nail to stop the natural asset companies.
So do the people going into the regenerative programs understand the Sustains law and the fact that it applies?
No, it has been very few people understand it. Harriet Hagman understands it. Representative Hagman understands it. That's why she has a bill, and there's many other problems with the Sustains Act, but that's why she has a bill to repeal it. I've actually had conversations inside USDA trying to get them to understand it, because right now USDA could write the rule on how this is applied, and they could put in the rule. The Secretary has a lot of latitude, so they could do things in the rule, such as say, this program will not be retroactive. Must have landowners' consent to do this. And that would put in those durable protections where the environmentalists would have their law, but landowners at least would have the ability to say, no, we're not going to participate in that. So there's some things that can be done right now that would protect them from the Sustains law. Mm-hmm. But as far as I know, those are not being carried out. So we do need to shine as big a light as we can on this so that landowners start getting a little bit more wary about taking these federal funds that come with these federal ties and ties into this whole other realm that we don't even fully understand the consequences of.
Franklin Sanders used to always say all government money comes with a sock in the jaw. And one of the things you'll discover if you dig deep and read all the terms and conditions and legal laws that apply to you, if you take government money, you will be amazed as to what you're agreeing with and that nobody's really telling you about. There's no full and fair disclosure up front. So Carolyn and I are writing a piece now on the fraudulent inducement of family wealth, but there is, when it comes to government money, there's tremendous fraudulent inducement. So you've been fighting something called 765 lines, which is very important to the whole debate in Texas about data centers, because Texas, as we know, is number one in the data center business. So explain to us what you're doing with 765 and why we need to know about it.
Well, a couple of years ago, back in 2025, landowners started just hearing the rumblings that this whole new transmission system was being planned across Texas. And it's known as the 765 project. We call it the power grab. And this was design is a design to build for the first time in Texas these 765 transmission lines. These things can get up to 215 feet tall. They are basically 15 stories is the average, and they take a much wider right of way than a regular transmission line. They're huge, and so first that Texas is thinking of building something this big, and they're planning to put it through some of the prettiest parts of Texas, the Hill Country. So the Hill Country is known being more like the Norman Rockwell kind of idyllic part of Texas. People go there because they don't see infrastructure. They don't see, man's hand, overbuilt hand in the nature. They actually get away from that. So the mere fact of putting these towers through the middle of that country is going to absolutely destroy property values through that area. But maybe what's more nefarious about this is why they're even building these or planning to build these. They're actually planning 4,000 linear miles once the full system is set up across Texas. And there's 3 big lateral lines that are going to go from East Texas to West Texas. Now, their reasoning for needing these lines, and you're going to love this, is because they need to power up the Permian Basin. The Permian Basin, they say, needs more electricity. So now think about the Permian Basin. It is one of the largest oil and gas fields in the world, not just the nation, in the world. And we're thinking that instead of using those resources, natural gas, which right now they have to flare off because they can't get it all out, we're talking about building power lines, big, long extension cords to transfer energy from the east side of the state to the west side of the state to power up the Permian. And as one of our members said early on, it's akin to hauling water to the sea. I mean, that's the brilliance of their plan. And so, but they say that we must have this grid, and they've been giving all kinds of reasons why we must have this grid. But when you pull back all the layers, what you really find out this is about, and this goes back to the study that they rely on. It's a 2022 study that was prepared by the big major oil and gas companies in Texas. And it says the Permian Basin needs more energy load, which the way to do that is through these big power lines. But what it's really about is those same major companies are largely owned by the big ESG bankers, so BlackRock and all those. What it's really about is being able to build these power lines to connect more solar and wind to the grid so they can get to their net zero and pass that cost on to the consumer. And also, most importantly, to build data centers. So we know that the data centers need infrastructure because they take so much energy, even if they build energy behind the meter. So they build their own energy source. They still have to connect to the grid because they cannot risk at all ever being out of power, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to connect to the grid. And we've also seen articles where the pro data center audience explains that companies are looking to locate data centers where they have the ability to tie into the grid. Right. So the grid needs to be built so the data centers can be built. And when you really pull back the layers on the 765, that's what we're talking about. That's what this is really about. It's not about sending energy to the Permian Basin. It's 100% about filling the net zero goals of the big major oil companies in Texas that are operating in Texas. And that's one reason you see all the big major trade associations supporting the 765 lines now. But filling that goal, and also to create the infrastructure to be able to bring on board more data centers in Texas.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. My impression, and this is just an intuition, it's a guess. We see BlackRock wanting to move the stock market or big stock market leadership to Texas from New York. Mm-hmm. We see Texas having more data centers than ever. And the big killer app in the financial world is adding automatic third locks and programmable money to stocks and bonds. I mean, if you look at currency, even if you add bank deposits and stable coins and crypto, that's only 25 trillion. Stocks or bonds are, 114 trillion at DTC and 250 trillion globally. So the killer app in the financial markets requires these data centers to manage it. And it looks to me like BlackRock and the leadership of building the digital financial control grid, have picked Texas as their number one location. We just, in the second quarter wrap up, I'm showing a video of Fink with Governor Abbott of Texas talking about how they're going to shift everybody's retirement savings into financing data centers. So Texas is right at the heart of building the digital control grid. And of course, that comes down to the land and energy. And it looks to me like the oil companies are just being told, if you swing your capacity to power all these energy or the data centers in Texas, we'll give you a break on your ESG requirements.
I think that makes a lot of sense. That squares up with everything that we're seeing here. Absolutely. But let me tell you one of the reasons that we are 100% in this fight. So we have actually intervened into all 5 of the CCN applications to actually working to try and stop the actual building of these lines. So they have 5 segments on all the 765 lines. We've intervened in all of them. We have the first ones abated for now, stopped until August, as the others are being considered. But one of the reasons is because of what it is doing to the small landowner, which this comes back to real people. These are you and me. We are the ones who are going to end up paying for this project and ultimately losing out a tremendous amount on this project. So to put it in realistic terms, we've crunched some numbers. The landowners whose land will be condemned for these 4,000 miles of linear electric cords. We figure, because of the height of these towers, the value of their property for the property that they are not compensated for, but from a mile on each side of these lines, will devalue that property at least by 40%.
Wow.
So you're a landowner. Yeah, you're a landowner. You have generational property. They put this 200-foot wide transmission line and 200-foot towers across your property. Automatically, the value of your property on either side is going to be decreased by 40%. And so we've calculated that up, and that's a $10 billion property value loss to landowners in Texas that is not being compensated for. And what is it? Who is going to benefit from this? Who's going to profit from this? The data centers, the BlackRocks, the oil and gas companies, the major oil and gas companies. And the other part of this that is maybe even worse is who pays for transmission lines in Texas. The ratepayer does. So right now in Texas, my electricity bill, 40% of that is paid for transmission lines already. And most of that are the CREZ transmission lines, which were built about 15, 20 years ago, which were for the sole purpose of bringing wind and solar on board into Texas. So 40% of my bill today is paid for those transmission lines. Now we're going to add on an even more expensive, massive infrastructure project, the 765, that ultimately the ratepayer is going to be paying for. It's not Encore, the transmission company, that's going to be paying for this. It's going to be the ratepayer. That cost is passed on to the ratepayer. So it is a win-win for BlackRock and for the transmission companies and for the data centers. And the other thing that this does is it creates a way to bring more wind and solar renewables on board. Mm-hmm. So it actually doesn't bring any more reliability into our grid. So let me put that in perspective as well. If you remember Storm Uri, when the Texas grid almost went down with seconds away from going down.
I do. I remember that.
Yeah. So 5 years ago, that is when that happened. Since that time, we have had a 20% increase in winter demand for electricity in Texas because of all the new people who have moved in. During that 5-year period, we have only added from a $50 billion investment in new energy sources in Texas, only 3% of that has been in durable energy, gas. Everything else has been renewables. It's been wind, solar, and batteries. So the reality is right now, Texas is more vulnerable today to handling a storm Uri than we were 5 years ago. We're not stronger. We're in worse shape. And now we want to add to this 765 transmission grid, which will only bring on more wind and solar and data centers and battery storage. It's not bringing on any more durable gas.
Let me get back to Stewarding Creation. One of the things you feel when you read Stewarding Creation, or I listen to you and your pastor talk about it, is such a deep love for the land and life, caring for the land. And, whether it's the deterioration of the soil or the pesticides, or now listening to you talk about 765, there's nothing in these plans that reflects a love and appreciation for the land. Nothing. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. This is all about profit. And that's why we see things like solar panels going up that absolutely destroy the land, wind turbines that absolutely destroy the land, and they are embraced and protected by the environmental community. It comes down to profits.
But here's the thing. I don't think it's just profit because, I spend time in locations around the world where many of these oligarchs live, and this kind of stuff doesn't go on their land or near their land or the land around them. Okay? So this is about shifting control and assets from one group of people into what George H.W. Bush used to call tighter and righter hands, right? So it's improving, the land that I own control and the beauty of it by wrecking yours.
Exactly. And that fits into a viewpoint I've held for a while. I think if you were to look at the largest landowners like Bezos and Gates, those who have invested so much in like the 30 by 30 agenda and getting us off real beef and all of these environmental agendas, I think if you look at their land holdings, you will see very likely a trend. My guess is they don't have conservation easements.
Right.
They don't have wind and solar, probably. They're not in the USDA conservation programs. They are making sure that the land they own is 100% privately owned without any strings or encumbrances, because they know the most valuable commodity in America is private land without those encumbrances.
Right.
So they're pushing that agenda and devaluing everybody else's property, which is only raising their own vote because they're not putting those things on their own land.
So one of my favorite quotes, did you ever know who Utah Phillips was? He was an old line activist many years ago, sort of the Woody Guthrie generation. And he once said, the planet is not dying, it's being killed. And the people killing it have names and addresses.
That's great.
So, Margaret, isn't there a problem with these transmission lines also? My understanding is living near a transmission line is not healthy, and it's not healthy for the cattle. Are there cattle in this part of the country? And assuming so, isn't there a problem with the cattle keeling over or getting sick from the electrical fallout from the line?
Yeah, what Encore is one of the big utilities that's going to be building these, and in the public utility hearings that have been going on, basically, if you summarize their position, they say, well, we have to build it to find out how it impacts. That's pretty much what we're hearing from them. Yeah, we're really getting back to that. They say, well, we've got studies.
It impacts other people's cattle, not their cattle.
Right. But there are studies that have shown, and actually lawsuits that have been filed, and one that show that milk production goes down, breeding goes down. And there's plenty on the horizon that shows this is not good for wildlife. And but of course they're ignoring all of that just to very, very quickly get this built. I might tell you something else about this project, which is very nefarious. When they first made their first public announcement, so they sent letters to counties and local governments saying, hey, we're going to be building this project. We'd like to know your impacts, the impacts that will occur to you. And also, when they first sent the notices to landowners, we may have to condemn your land. We may be putting a route through your land.
That was my next question. They're condemning the land, right?
Right. Those notices on the very first segment, which is Big Hill to Sand Lake, that they filed on, which is the least populated part of the state. So they started in the least populated part where not many people were going to be able to make a stink and fight back. They sent out the notice to the landowner that they may be in the route and they may be condemning their land on December 8th of 2025, so last year. And those landowners had to find an attorney, file their intervention papers, and find an attorney at about an average about $25,000 an attorney. That's about what it's running in here within 30 days, or else they would have no say in the process.
Over Christmas and the New Year.
Exactly. That timing was absolutely deliberate because they did it at a time when they'd have the least. Well, first off, they may miss the notice in the mail. A lot of people threw them away, thought it was junk mail. And if they did find it, then they've got to try to secure an attorney. First learn about the whole process, find a competent attorney in that field, and get them hired in 30 days and get their intervention filed. So the other thing is they did provide notice a year before as they started putting these plans together, and they sent them out to the counties and the local governments. And in the Long Shore to Dinosaur segment, they sent that notice out, I think again, it was just, I think that one might have been December 10th, and asked for a response within 21 days. So they only gave the local governments like 21 days. Please tell us all the impacts that may happen from this project, which they sent basically a one-page description and said, please give us all the impacts for. Well, there wasn't even enough information for these counties to say, this is how it's going to impact us.
Like New Year's Eve, and county people accrue vacation time and use it at the end of the year, right?
Yeah. So again, that tells you if they really wanted to do this project right, if they really thought they had a legitimate basis for doing this, they would have gone around, they would have done it in the right way and given landowners more of a notice. But they intentionally delivered these notices so that it would give the landowner the least, make it as difficult as possible for landowners to stand up and defend their land.
Okay, so we're coming into the end, Margaret. I just want to remind everybody where your website is. So, Lou, if we could bring up American Stewards of Liberty, and the piece for Stewarding Creation is there. You can download. It's available. You can pass it on. Maybe if we could just look at some of Margaret's social media, Lou. So you're up on Instagram, and you're up. I think you're on X. Yep. And how, so people can call you, they can email you, they can support you, they can join up through the website. Tell us a little bit more about what we can do to support you. And tell us more about your annual event, because the last one was super. So I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, so we're planning another one, and we're just starting to nail down the date. Probably the first week of February is the week that we're looking at, and we're going to keep it in Fort Worth. It's a good place, center of the country, easy to get into. So it's great. You know, we bring in experts on these property rights issues. We did have Rick Rollins was one of our keynotes last year. In fact, I think you had the pleasure of following her, Catherine.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Yeah.
I did.
And of course we had Harriet Hagman as well, Representative Hagman, who next year, hopefully she is going to be Senator Hagman.
She's running. When is her primary? Do you know, Margaret?
Oh, I want to say it's August, but don't quote me on that.
I think it is August, because I had dinner with her and she's been absolutely super. And so I would love to see her in the Senate, because she really understands these issues, and she knows how to fight and win. She was great.
She really
on that.
does.
Yeah, she does.
We definitely greatly admire her skill, not only her depth of knowledge, but her ability to work with her colleagues. And she's done a good job at educating them as well in areas that they're just not as familiar. And they really appreciate, her colleagues appreciate what she has done. So
and she's fun.
That tells you a lot.
She's so much fun.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
She's great. So
Okay, well-
we're looking at next February.
Okay. Carolyn, any last thoughts?
No, this is something you need to pay attention to, even if you don't live in Texas, because this is where things are going.
Right. And I want to point out, if you talk to state legislators all over the country, one of the things they're always talking about is how helpful both Margaret and American Stewards of Liberty have been all over the country on NACs, on conservation easements, on all these issues. You know, you're somebody we can go to and we can get the facts in very highly complicated, these are highly complex issues, and you know it's neurosurgery, so you need somebody who's very thorough and precise. And I don't know, we didn't remind everybody that you grew up in a family that litigated with the federal government for 27 years, and Carolyn and I only did 11, so we're in awe. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Financial Rebellion. You have a wonderful week.
Sure. Okay, we're live. Can you tell us your name?
I'm Debbie.
Debbie, and this is about your brother.
Yes.
What year is this?
It was 1985 and I was 15 years old when it happened.
Tell us what happened.
So he was at daycare and I was at school. I came home. There was a message on the answering machine that they had gone to the hospital because he was having difficulty breathing. And so I kind of went about my business. I didn't really think much of it. And it was homecoming, so I was down in my room getting ready to go to the homecoming game. And my parents came home. And they said, you need to come up here because we don't think we can make it down there to you. And so I went up the stairs and they told me that he had died. Later, an autopsy was done and it was ruled a SIDS.
Let me just show everybody his picture. This is Danny.
Danny, yep.
Little Danny boy. And how old was Danny at that time?
He was 3 months and 27 days old, so it was his 4-month shots that got him, the DTP and OPV.
And tell people what OPV is.
Oral polio vaccine.
So in those days they would have just like a little squirt in the mouth, or I had a sugar lump.
Yeah, it was probably, I'm guessing, the squirt.
Squirt, because he's only 3.5 months.
And
so
then it was whole cell pertussis.
So for people who don't know, DPT is now off the market. It's. Do you want to talk about? Do you know anything about DPT?
Just that I know the whole cell was very highly toxic, and it's hurt numerous children, and they don't give it here in the United States anymore. But I think, if I'm correct, they're still giving it in Africa. Possibly.
More than likely, they seem to do. I'm just going to put Danny up here a second.
Thank you.
Okay.
So now they have DTaP and TDAP, which are the acellular versions, but they're still hurting children.
And what have you got there on your phone? Were you going to show us something?
This is his shot record.
From way back then, you've got a shot record.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can show everybody this. I don't know how this is going to look. Phone to phone, you may not be able to see this.
So you can see he had on 10/8/1985 hit those 2 vaccines, DTP and OPV. And then I also have his death announcement on my phone on 10/11/1985. He was dead.
And so you were, what, 15 did you say at the time? So how did that, what is this?
That's his death announcement. I've got the last name covered just out of respect for my parents. They,
No, of course.
They're just private people,
So how did that affect you? Do you have children?
I do.
And how did that affect you with vaccinating?
Well, I unfortunately didn't quite wake up to that soon enough. I am a registered nurse, and I can tell you every time I took my children in, I always had a horrible feeling in my stomach and my chest, which I believe is the Holy Spirit cautioning me. But you know, you know how it is. Everybody's like, you know, the shots, and I didn't know, which kills me that I didn't know this, that I could say no.
And now?
I'm 100% anti-vax. 100%.
There's nothing that would make you take a shot or vaccine?
Nothing.
Good for you.
Nothing. And I did stop vaccinating my children. I did stop.
Well, we're going to put Danny on the bus. We're going to keep him on the bus. He travelled on the Vax bus. I remember him. He's now here on the Children's Health Defence bus. I'm going to sign his name on the bus. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Polly.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.